I'm today joined by María Fernanda Espinosa, President of the UN General Assembly for the 73rd session and former Minister of National Defense of Ecuador. And today our theme is 5 Ps. It is people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnerships. So I'm going to address questions to Ms. Espinosa and get her remarks. And I do hope the audience will enjoy the conversation. So to start with, Ms. Espinosa, we discussed we are at COP26 at the moment, and you are in Baku. And with the impact of COVID-19, we understood the importance of digitalization and how you can tune in virtually and join us today. So it's a great pleasure, but climate change, poverty, and inequalities are the defining issues of our age. As UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has mentioned in the last UNGA, humanity is in code red. So what do you think this COP26 should achieve, and what we should expect as people of humanity out of this COP26?
Once again, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be with you. And just to respond to your question, I think that in more than a decade now of climate negotiations, of leading my country's delegations, I don't think, and I have to be honest, I have ever seen, so many newspaper articles, op-eds, scientific analysis, hashtags from it's now or never, or don't choose extinction, code red, as you mentioned, code red for humanity, and everything in between. It is the first time in almost 2 years that climate editorials and headlines exceed those from the COVID-19 pandemic and the vaccines. So what it means is the world is in alert, and it's watching, especially the younger generations. And basically, what we are witnessing is a myriad of statements, of commitments, of promises from street protests in Glasgow as we speak, and elsewhere, not only in Glasgow, but in many parts of the world, and angry calls to greater ambition and walking the talk. We go from this to, I would say, a profuse awakening of young voices calling for intergenerational climate justice and responsibility. So in short, I would like to say that there is a world mobilization to stabilize our climate, and there is no single speech or article which does not use an endless list of terrifying data, percentages, comparisons. And yes, we have to agree that the planet is 1.1 degrees Celsius warmer than in pre-industrial levels. And the severe impacts of these increasing temperatures is already being witnessed all over the world, not only in the South, not only in small island developing states. The crisis is touching all countries without exception. And extreme weather events are increasing, as we know, in frequency and intensity worldwide. We have witnessed wildfires in California with a huge loss of forests and livelihoods, in Canada and the Arctic, invaded by heat waves and fires, 200 people killed by floods in Germany, etc., etc. So the World Bank estimates that if climate change is left unchecked, it will push 132 million people into poverty in the next decade. It will cause, if I'm not mistaken, 216 million forced displaced persons. So the climate crisis has a human face. It is obvious. So in sum, to respond to your question, I think COP26 in Glasgow, it is happening at a very critical juncture. And that is the reason why I think that the whole world is following the negotiations, looking for a breakthrough in climate action. And this will be perhaps being optimistic, the pathway for a greener, a more sustainable, a more resilient world for present and future generations.
Thank you so much. I know you're a great voice for women empowerment and gender equality, and there has been some concerns about the women engagement in the negotiations for COP26. So what would be your thoughts on this?
Well, that I think we are improving, but we are not there yet. I think that gender equality is still one of the greatest challenges in climate negotiations and multilateralism, for that matter, in general at the UN. It is, I think, just a mirror, a reflection of the gender gaps that we find in every aspect of public life. So as women, we continue to represent a minority of elected politicians and members of government cabinets worldwide. And here some interesting data. According to UN Women and Interparliamentarian Union, as January 2021, less than 12% of the positions of heads of state or government are held by women, and only 21% of ministerial positions worldwide are held by women, and 25% of parliamentarians are women, meaning that 75% of parliamentarians worldwide are men, and 30% of the representatives in local councils are women. So basically, this is the overall picture. But if we look more closely to the climate negotiations, which I have followed, witnessed, been hands-on for more than a decade, as I mentioned before, we see that women government delegates are basically an average of 33%. And I don't know if this information is current, but it was 33% of all positions in decision-making process, in the negotiation process, but also in technical panels under the UN climate change process. In 2020 and 2019, and I think the recent data in 2021, it just proved that there is this imbalance. And perhaps, this is one of the reasons why we don't see significant progress on female representation, but also in the final outcomes of climate negotiations. So there are some data that was identified and through our research in the last COP in-person climate change conference in Madrid. Let's recall COP25. 60% of government delegates and 73% heads and deputy heads of delegations were men. So that is a mirror, as I said, of what is happening worldwide. So I think that basically, if we look at the age average, we're not doing better. It means that we need more women at the decision-making table, and we need more young change makers, specialists and professionals at the negotiation table, but also in panels, in expert discussions during COP. So I think that, for example, I had the incredible opportunity always in every COP to meet with the so-called the YOUNGO, which is the youth constituency under the framework of the UN Convention on Climate Change. And I would say that it has been, an amazing experience to look at their declarations, at the level of interaction, at the very sophisticated understanding of what climate negotiations are about, what are the key issues, and also how to unravel and resolve the bottlenecks during the negotiations. So YOUNGO had, I think that more than 200 youth NGOs, more than 5,500 individuals taking being actively engaged. So these are good news for climate negotiations. But I think that there is still, a long way to go. Absolutely, and I think that it's not a tokenistic, it's not an arithmetic issue. It looks good to have young voices. It looks good to have, gender parity, but it really brings quality, sustainability, and social ownership to climate-related decisions.
Amazing remarks as always. We have seen G20 and now we are at COP26, and I know you have been pushing the agenda around multilateralism and the importance of that. And at COP26, we have seen more than 100 world leaders joining us. What would be your message to the world leaders around multilateralism and climate action?
Well, I would say we saw a very, I would say, weak, minimalistic outcome of the G20 declaration in terms of mitigation ambition, in terms of concrete and actionable commitments. But I think that there is still hope. I think that Glasgow COP26 offers the opportunity to address the main issues affecting progress in mitigation and adaptation to climate change and into climate justice. I think that a successful COP26 will have to take in consideration that over the past 25 years, the richest 10% of the global population has been responsible for more than half of all carbon emissions, and the poorest 50% were responsible just for 7% of the emissions. So there is a great responsibility, especially from G20 countries. They represent 80% of the total emissions worldwide, so they have a greater responsibility. The UN Convention on Climate Change considers this very important principle of common but differentiated responsibility. So I think that there is a lot of space for improvement. There is a need to put the pledges and the promises and the commitments to give them wings so they can fly and become a reality. And this is urgent because the developing world, the poorest countries, the small island developing states, rural women, indigenous women, etc., they are really suffering from the impacts of climate change. And if you put together the impacts of climate change together with the economic shock of the COVID-19 pandemic, the fiscal stress, the high debt of countries, and the small policy space for developing countries is really making, calling urgently, I would say, for a boost in cooperation, in solidarity, in making the financial system deliver on debt relief, deliver on issues such as in debt relief, for example, debt for climate swaps, access to liquidity increasing. We had good news from the IMF, an injection of special drawing rights for countries, especially in the global south, that are really in need of resources to respond to the basic needs of their population, education, health, etc., but also to undertake serious transition processes in terms of ecological transitions, in terms of energy transitions. And this is true for the big economies, but also for the small economies. And here, looking at the global south in general, I think that nature-based solutions and intelligent, smart adaptation and resilience building is much needed. But for that, we need to honor our commitments in terms of finance, climate finance with a gender lens, of course, because us women, are suffering more than men of the impacts of climate change. And we can show it with numbers, but I don't want to really throw a lot of numbers, but it is true. And we not only need more money for the global south, but we need technology transfer, we need capacity building. So there is a lot in the plate of the negotiators this week at COP26. But I am an optimist. I really hope that the decisions that are going to be taken are, the ones that the world needs. This code red for humanity needs, and we need to be serious about achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. We need to be serious about finalizing the famous Paris rule book that had, after 5 years of the Paris Agreement. I think it is about time that we have a blueprint, that we have a roadmap for implementing and monitoring the implementation of the Paris Agreement.
That's amazing. And also, speaking of the government pledges and the commitments, we can't ignore the non-state actors. And one of the P's of today is partnerships, and SDG 17 is based on partnerships as well. So we need to include definitely non-state actors, private sector and civil society into the conversation. What kind of a role do you think non-state actors should play in this critical COP?
Well, I think let's give it, non-state actors is a wide category. I think the role of civil society is critical. The role of activism, the role of loud voices, the role of science, of academia, it's critical to push, to inform for wise decision making in the climate negotiations. And I think non-state actors is a wide range. The private sector is a critical ally and partner in our struggle to stabilize climate. Let's give you an example. We say we need to phase out coal. We need to cut emissions in half by 2030 and be carbon neutral by 2050. That's what the Paris Agreement says. And if you look at coal, just the coal sector, only 20% of coal projects come from public investment, 80% come from private investment. So the responsibility of the private sector is huge. And I can feel the private sector is open to undertake the road for transition and transformation. And I said non-state actors are important in two aspects. First, institutions and organizations in companies have a stake on emissions. So the commitments adopted by states to reduce emissions cannot be effective in mitigating climate change if the private sector does not commit in the same way. And in many ways, it is happening. So I gave the example of coal production. The G20 has clearly stated that they will stop funding coal projects abroad. That was part of the agreements of the G20, which is good, it's promising. But how about private investments in coal, as mentioned? So these are the critical challenges we have. And if we look at the last UNEP emissions gap report, they basically, the report is revealing that new coal projects could represent 240% of current coal production by 2030, an increase into 240% by 2030. So I think we need the engagement, the commitment of the private sector for sure. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the role of civil society is critical to put pressure, to advocate for the rights of future generations, the rights of the disenfranchised and the most vulnerable. I think it is absolutely critical. And together with civil society, the scientific community, academia, we are all necessary in the struggle to stabilize our climate. And I think that this is also an issue of co-responsibility. The climate crisis is not an isolated crisis. It's an interconnected crisis. It is interconnected to the inequalities crisis. It is interconnected to the global health crisis. It is connected to the food security crisis. So we need to have a holistic perspective, and in a holistic perspective allow for holistic responses, which are transsectoral, multi-stakeholder, whole of society approaches. And we do have a say. We have to be co-responsible. Of course, our governments represent us in a way, but we have also a responsibility, a right to a safe and healthy environment, but also a responsibility as consumers, as citizens. We do have a very important responsibility as well.
Thank you, Ms. Espinosa. We can't really thank you enough for your time and for your generous contributions and your remarks, inspiring as always, and look forward to hearing further thoughts from you in the upcoming WHF engagements.
Absolutely. You can count on me as always. Let's keep our fingers crossed, our heart and minds, sending good energy, advocating for, our agenda. And let's hope that the final outcome of COP26 will not be disappointment, but on the contrary, a beacon of hope and the possibility of fixing what humankind has in a way harmed. And we have inflicted profound wounds to our planet and to nature. It's a human-made crisis, therefore there has to be a human-made solution as well. Thank you, and as always, a true pleasure to be with the World Humanitarian Forum.